Welcome to the CSS Grid video. Just like Flexbox, CSS Grid is also powerful and really useful if you learn how to use it. I will take you through the basic know-how. I have selected the mostly used properties to teach, especially for making our project, and after I'll provide you resources so that you can further enhance your knowledge and master it. This is a basic overview of what a CSS grid can be used for. It is very useful for separating elements. The CSS grid layout module offers a grid-based layout system with rows and columns, making it easier to design web pages without having to use floats and positioning. Flexbox is one-dimensional, while CSS grid is two-dimensional. Even though similar, they serve different purposes and can be used together in creating a website. Now, the first step in using CSS Grid is defining it in a container, which we will set the display to grid. Inside the container, its elements then become grid items. The horizontal line of grid items are called rows, and the vertical line of the grid items are called columns. The space between each column or row are called gaps. The line between columns are called column lines, while the lines between rows are called row lines. Let us learn the rest in the browser. So back in our folder, let's load up our default index and style files. I've cleaned my previous code up, so make sure you clean everything up so that we have an empty code. Okay. Now first, let's declare the container. So creating a div, give it a class of container. And then let's create some boxes. So div class, and give it a name of box. Copy and paste this 5 more times. Okay. Now targeting our container, and then our box. So let's give our box a background of red, and let's give our boxes some value. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 6. Okay. So save this and see what we have made so far. Okay. Now we need to give some margin. So margin of about 10 pixels. I rather gave the margin in my container. Let me clean this, let me copy this and paste it in my box. So save this and refresh. Okay, we now have our margin which spaces out the boxes clearly. Now it says set the parent property display to grid. So the container is the parent. So we're setting this display to grid. So save this and refresh, and we add a slight change right there. So you define columns in CSS Grid by using the property grid template columns and giving it a parameter with the numbers. The number of parameters and value indicates how the grid should be set. This also sets rows automatically. So let us input the property right here, grid template columns. And then let's say we want each column to be 70 pixels wide, and we want 3 of them. So let's say 70 pixels 3 times. Now save this and refresh, and now we have 3 70 pixels wide boxes. We can add so many values. So let me say I'll add another 60 pixels so that our fourth box can be 60 pixels wide. So you can see this one is just 60 pixels wide while the rest is 70. So that's grid template columns. And we can also use fraction. So let's say we want this to have 1 fraction, and the third box to have 2 fractions of whatever width that it is. So refresh, and this one add the first fraction, which is 1 FR, and then the second one is only 70 pixels wide. The second one took 2 fractions of the width, and the fourth one is only 60 pixels. And the rows were set automatically. Now to set rows manually, we use the property grid template rows. So let's say our boxes are 70 pixels column each. And now let's have our grid template rows. So let's say we want to have 100 pixels of each row with the first 3 ones. So save this and refresh, and you can see our row was set to 100 pixels. Now let me make this second one 200 pixels and save this, refresh, and you can see our row height was extended to 200 pixels. We can also use fraction for this. So 1 fraction, and the first one should be 2 fractions. So 2FR, save this and refresh, and everything appears nicely. So this is 2FR, 200 pixels, and 1FR of grid template rows. Let's try another example. Let's say we want our columns to be 200 pixels each. So saving this and refresh, we have 2 columns which are 200 pixels tall. Okay, let's move on to the next example. Now we can use fraction, we can use pixels. So let's try different values. So let's say we want the first box to be auto, the second one to be 100 pixels, third one to be 20%, fourth one, fifth, and finally let's put 50 pixels. So save this and refresh. Now with the auto value, this makes rows or columns as wide as its content. So if content is 1000 characters, it will expand to fit it. The second one is 100 pixels, which makes the column 100 pixels no matter what. The percentages, which is in this case 20%, makes column as wide as its container, so no matter how container gets expanded, it will take 20% of it. The 2 fraction, or FR, means the fraction of the available space left. So 2FR will take 2 fractions, or times 2 of the last fraction, and the 1FR will take the 1FR left after the 2FR occupies it. And then we have the last one, which is the 50 pixels no matter what. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Let's look at the grid gaps. The grid column gap creates a gap between columns. So we have grid column gap, and let's make it 20 pixels. So this creates a column gap of 20 pixels. And now we also have grid row gap, which creates gap between rows. So grid row gap, and let's also make it 20 pixels and save this and refresh. Since it's only one row, we didn't see any changes. So let me take off one of these values, 2 actually. So save this and refresh and see everything in action. That's our gap right there. Grid gap does both of them. So if it has one parameter, it sets a gap for both. But if it has two, the first one sets for row and the second sets for the column. So we have our grid gap, 20 pixels, which does it for both. No changes. But if we have two values, so let's say I have 10 pixels here, you will see what I described earlier. Okay, next, after creating grids, the columns and rows are numbered. The columns are horizontal and the rows are vertical. So we have 1 over here, 2, 3, 4, and finally 5. So we have 5 lines. And we have 1, 2, 3 with the second row. So 3 lines here, 5 lines here. So reversing it, we have -1, 2, 3, 4, and finally -5. So that's the numbering. Firefox has a grid displayer. So let me show you how it looks like. So open up menu, or you can use the shortcut key F12. So inspector, and then click on div container. That's our grid showing, and click display line numbers. So we have our 1 over here, we have our 2, we have line number 3, 4, and then 5, and it's reverse -1, -2, -3, -4, and 5. And we have with the rows 1, 2, and finally 3. Okay, so what if we want this second box to take up the rest of this space? So first, I'll give my second box a class of Gene. So I'll target that class .gene, and then I'll write grid column. So in order to do this, you have to start from the number it is at and end at the column number we want it to. So 1, 2. So it starts as 2, this gap right here. So 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 2 all the way to 5. So let's write 2 over 5, semicolon. Now save and refresh this. And as you can see, our 2 took up all the space and then pushed the rest of the items to the new row. And if you want it to only occupy 2 over 4, you just write the value and refresh, and you see it happening. So this took 2, 3, and 4. Awesome. It's the same thing with grid row. So it's the same rules and same thing with the grid row. Now using the grid row, let's give our box 1 a class of E. So head over and target our E, and then grid row of this starts at 1, 2, and then 3. So 1 over 3. And save this and refresh, and our box 1, let me make this irrelevant for now. Our box 1 takes up 1, 2, and then 3, all the way up to 3. Awesome. Okay, now what we have done so far, I think we can go ahead and make our projects now. But first, let me leave you with these resources. We have the CSS Grid by Thomas H. Park. Throughout its 28 levels, you will learn all the basic stuff you need to know about CSS. And then we have Grid by example.com/examples with great CSS Grid examples and their code, so that you can try and replicate most of whatever you see here. And finally, CSSTricks.com also has a nice guide about CSS. Check out the notes for these links. Let's move on to the project now. We are going to be making our CSS Grid project now. So what we are going to be making looks something like this. What is displayed mostly in news websites like CNN or BBC. So first, we need to create a new folder and name this Grid News. Okay, and closing this up, let's create an HTML and CSS file as usual. Select my Grid News folder, style.css. Okay. Now we generate our default code. Change this to style.css. And then clean this JavaScript tag. Okay. Now we can open our page. It's empty. So within our body, let's have our header tag saying CNN/BBC news. And then after that, we have our container. So div tag with the class of container. Next, we have our news elements within this container. So we use article for this. So we have article, and within this article, we'll give it a class. I'll use B. So copy and paste this like 5 times. So save this and open it up in the browser. Okay. Now we have everything showing side by side. So let's have something displaying within this article. So football news, we have C Ronaldo, for Cristiano Ronaldo, keeps breaking records. And our second news will be Lionel Messi. You can't mention one player without the other. Messi's skills are uncomparable. Let's have some boxing news too right here. So we have Lomachenko fights so skillfully. And then we have Mayweather, Money Mayweather, has another expensive fight coming up. Let's add one more. So One Piece anime breaks another Guinness World Record, Guinness Book of Records. So save this and refresh. Okay, everything appears nicely. Okay, let's have a second container. We'll name this More News. And then declaring this container. So a class of container. And then we also have the same article with a class of B. So copy and paste this about 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. And we say Korea, Russia, Pakistan, and Turkey joint spaceship project. Next we have something like LeBron James childhood story. Finally, we have some funny news like Kanye West and Trump tag team in WWE, because why not? They get along nicely. Okay, so save this and refresh, and everything is working so far. So in our style sheet, first we target the body and reset our margin and padding. So margin of 0, a padding of 0. Next, you'll be targeting the container, and you will give this a display property of grid. So we have a display grid. Saving this and refresh. Next, you make the grid template columns 3. So 2 FR, 1 FR, another 1 FR. So grid template column. So save this and refresh, and we have the 2 fraction, the 1 and the other one. So now we need to give some styles to our boxes. So I'll name this B1, B2, B3, B4, and finally B5. The same applies to this. Now, we select our styling. So B1 needs to have a background color of red. So copy and paste this for the rest. And change this to B2 and make this a color of yellow. Make this blue and change it to B3. Change this to B4 and make this green. Let's make this also blue. Okay, and name it to B5. So save this and refresh. We have our styling appearing nicely. So let's give it the container a margin of 10 pixels to shift it from the left and right edges a bit. So we have our margin, and then we need to give it a grid gap because they are too closely packed. So a grid gap of 10 pixels. I think 10 pixels should be okay. Oh yeah, 10 pixels is okay. And now let's give it a row of 200 pixels and 150 pixels. So we have grid, template, rows. So 200 pixels here and 150 pixels. Save this and refresh. So we have 200 pixels and 150 pixels template rows. Cool. Now let's make the text white as the black looks too. So color should be white. And then we will align the text to center. So save this and refresh. Okay. The yellow looks too, so I'll change this color to black. That's only for the yellow boxes. Okay. Now, our project is almost complete. But we want this red news article here to take the first and the second row. And if you remember this, the way we use this is the grid row start and the grid row end. So by counting the lines, we have 1, 2, and 3. So first, we need to give this one a class and target that. Or we can select its child element selector. So it's right here, B1. Let's give it a class of anything. I'll use T. So targeting the T, so give it a grid row of 1/3 since you want it to end at the third line. So save this and refresh, and we have the one taking 1, 2, and 3. Awesome. Let's change this font. So font family, I'll choose Lucida Sans. Add a semicolon at the end. Save this and then refresh, and we have our project looking nice. Okay, You can go ahead and play with it and keep changing some features to see what you can come up with. Let's move on to the next video.